You're going to die again anyway, why not marry me once? There is a missing Hanlin Shen Huai in the court, and a reborn Suya in Huai'an City. According to theory, these two people are beyond reach. One is a young legend with a bright future but elusive, and the other is a poor and impoverished family struggling to make a living in Huai'an City. The two met through a narrow path due to the fate of Suya's rebirth, each revealing their true nature in the calculation of the countdown to life, and also getting to know each other in the struggle of power. Time is tight, and fate is in turmoil again. This time, in Suya's life and death arena, there are two sides. Her own mother and her lover. Keywords of the novel. Reborn woman from a humble family with no pop-ups. Download the complete text of Reborn Woman from a Humble Family, and read the latest chapters of Reborn Woman from a Humble Family. Chapter 1. Live Without Crying, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Live Without Crying, 1. When there is a missing ranking official Shen Huai in the current dynasty, there is a reborn Suya in the city of Huai'an. According to theory, these two people are unbeatable. One is a young legend who was born out of nowhere and was appointed as a scholar in the Hanlin Academy, while the other is just a poor and impoverished family struggling to make a living in Huai'an City. As the storyteller of the bookstore, Suya spends her daily time reading and telling stories with the female relatives of various prefectures. Whenever there is an enviable talent and beauty in the story, the young ladies associate it with reality and inevitably begin to imagine that the stunning young Hanlin will suddenly appear, and they will fall in love and tie a good relationship. This scene has been going on for nearly 3 years, and the fantasies of the girls have not yet changed. Alas, although there are many talented people in the world, it is difficult for anyone to surpass Shen Hanlin. The Qian annuity list has been released, and my cousin once witnessed Jia wandering the streets with her own eyes, which she still remembers. It is also said that only after seeing Shen Huai did she realize that the storytelling novel did not deceive anyone. The young lady of the Chao governor's family had just returned from her ancestral home outside the capital. At this moment, she put down her notebook and let out a faint sigh as the young girl embraced spring. It's already the 28th of the 12th lunar month, and the flower hall of the Huai'an City Chao Du mansion is adorned with jingling bells and clusters of flowers. 8 or 9 young ladies gather together, not only to clean up the dust for the Chao Du Miss, but also to carry the annual gifts between the female relatives of various prefectures and manage their best friend relationship before New Year's Eve. Today, as the protagonist starts the conversation, the ladies either sit or stand together, and the topic shifts from the storybook to reality. But it's been over 2 years now, and Shen Hanlin still hasn't returned to the capital. I don't know where he has traveled, but has he endured hardships? A good man has aspirations in all directions. Traveling is just about eating some hard work. Shen Hanlin will have even greater success in the future. I only hope he won't be too captivated by any young lady too soon. It's better for him to become someone else's quick son. Lol. A heartfelt and quick murmur of a wish suddenly caused a burst of laughter. Seeing the young ladies chatting enthusiastically, Suya quietly took a few steps back and handed the notebooks from the bookcases to the maids of each household. Finally, she greeted Miss Chao's eldest maid and said that her task had been completed today, and she needed to go back now. The maidservant settled her fees and gave her a string of money as a reward. The two exchanged auspicious words, and Suya successfully ended the work. 17-year-old Suya came out of the corner door of the inner residence of the Chao governor's mansion and looked back at the high courtyard wall. The silly laughter of the ladies was particularly in her ears. They are all women who marry blindly. No matter how wealthy their status is, it is difficult for them to have independent marriage. So what if they take advantage of their youth and dream more? Besides, the Shen Huai and Shen Hanlin that they are concerned about, when it comes to them, no one in the world knows them. In the palace examination 3 years ago, Shen Huai was originally the newly selected top scorer in the imperial examination. However, the head of the cabinet, Lu Ji, claimed that he was only 17 years old and suggested that young men should not be the role models of students in the world. He forcefully selected his own student from behind and recommended him as the top scorer, causing Shen Huai to rank second on the list. Unexpectedly, at the Qiongling banquet that followed, the Empress Dowager rose up to see the new talented scholars and recognized Shen Huai as the biological grandson of her long-lost sister. Then the matter of changing the top scorer on the spot was revealed. The emperor was in a very difficult situation. His ears were soft, and after the top 3 list was submitted, he clicked on it himself. Now, on one hand, there was the imperial gold list that had already been announced to the world, and on the other hand, there was an old love minister who had been with him for many years. His mother was in a difficult situation, and she couldn't help but ponder and ponder. On the contrary, Shen Huai took the initiative to step forward and calmly completed the scene, saying that he was indeed young and lacked experience, and invited himself to leave Beijing for a trip. The Empress Dowager protected her grandson outside of her watch, and the emperor also liked the thoughtfulness of the top scorer in this new subject. Therefore, after being appointed as the editor of the Shenhua Hanlin Academy as a routine, she specially appointed him as the crown prince's attendant. From 7th grade to 5th grade, she instantly threw the top scorer in the new subject out of sight. According to the tradition of, not being a Jinsher does not enter the Hanlin, not being a Hanlin does not enter the cabinet, in this dynasty, Shen Huai is a top-notch minister who has already planned for the future. These stunningly talented young talents are immediately the fragrant steamed buns and good son-in-law in the eyes of the nobles in the capital, and those present have long been rubbing their hands. Unfortunately, Shen Huai was well behaved and took the opportunity to seek a reward for marital autonomy at the Qiongling banquet. After practicing the rules in the Hanlin Academy for a month, he really went on a trip to Beijing. From then on, there was little news and only legends. 2.5 years ago, when Suya was reborn, he used the legendary young man who was said to be handsome and talented to compile a lot of materials, accurately grasping the nostalgia of the young girls, and quickly standing firm in the Huai'an storytelling circle. But no matter how good the material is, even after 2.5 years of continuous testing, it has long been indifferent. However, he is a man who cannot be beaten by any means. In Suya's plan, it is most practical to find a loyal and progressive husband who can take care of his widowed mother with her. Those legends are just things used to make money. Moreover, for Suya today, even this simple reality is already a luxury. Suya mockingly waved her hand into the air, adjusted her expression, and pushed open her own door. Not far from the Chao governor's mansion, in the densely populated residential area under the river, there is a narrow alley sandwiched between them. In the crevice of the alley, there is also an independent courtyard, which is the home of her and her widowed mother Yen. Yen was ironing fabrics in the main room when she heard the sound and looked up. She was only in her 30s, and although she had a beautiful appearance, her temples were already frosty. Seeing Suya push the door in, Yen's face naturally showed a gentle smile. She carefully placed the ironed fabric into the empty space of the bamboo-woven bookshelf, and helped Suya adjust the strap of the bookshelf. She asked her, "Is it possible to have a holiday after work today?" After delivering these, I'll go find the shopkeeper to settle the bill." Suya responded as she walked, approaching the door and turning back anxiously. Without waiting for her to speak, Yen smiled helplessly and said, "I understand. I won't go to the canal, no one will shout." Suya slightly curved her eyes and nodded, saying, If you want to go, I'll accompany you when I come back." Turning around and closing the courtyard door, Suya's smile on her face dissipated. She had a secret that she couldn't express in her mouth, especially not to tell her mother. "There are still 193 days left until the day when I was killed in my previous life. The day before Yan's death in his previous life was only 190 days away. And all of that happened by the canal where she didn't let Yan get close. In the past life, a series of loud noises on the Qingjiangpu dock dissipated 30.3 lives, including the Yan family. The bad news came, and she buried the Yen family under the guidance of her neighbors in a daze. Only then did she know that the big explosion not only caused nearly 100 casualties, but also killed a high-ranking official. However, the government meant to minimize the situation, only claiming that an accident had occurred. The people privately discussed that there must be hidden information inside. Suya became an orphan girl and refused to let her mother die inexplicably. She went to the Yamen gate to plead for justice and requested that the official investigate the explosion case thoroughly. However, to her surprise, the official did not see her at all. The Yamen guard shouted fiercely at the troublemakers to drive her away. Suya determined that there was indeed a problem with it and refused to submit. He then persuaded several other families with casualties to go to the capital together to file a complaint. Then, she was silently killed. Suya, who was struggling on the brink of death, tore through the killer's sleeve, revealing a ferocious scar coiled on her arm. The scar appeared countless times in Suya's nightmares, shining in the moonlight and throwing her like rags in the weeds. On her deathbed, Suya heard the person sneer coldly and disdainfully. Even the little ants dare to ask the sky. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Live Without Crying, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Live Without Crying, 2, Little Ant Farmer. Little ants, little people. Because it is a life like an ant, is it not even worth asking for justice? Suya's heart was filled with resentment and unwillingness, wanting to struggle and shout angrily, wanting not to accept her fate, but could only collapse in the weeds, without even the ability to pull a blade of grass. Her final vision was the pale sky in the crevices of the messy grass and branches. When she was more conscious, she had already returned to 3 years ago. The aroma of the food awakened her, and Yen was as lively as ever. She smiled and teased her, saying that she was already a 15-year-old girl and even acted like a lazy bug, urging her to go wash up quickly. 15 years old. Suya drifted to wash and sit at the dinner table like a dream, staring at her mother greedily. The tip of her tongue was full of the taste that once made her crazy. Tears fell into kanji, which frightened Yen Shi. "I'm fine, mother. I just had a dream. I dreamt that you didn't want me anymore." She couldn't wipe away the surging tears and hugged Yen's waist, burying her face on her mother's warm and soft belly, her heart filled with an indescribable taste. Just a moment ago, she hated life, hated being an ant, and her life was beyond her control. But at this moment, her head was patted by her mother's soothing touch, and her ear was filled with her mother's crying and laughing comfort. However, gratitude rose in her heart. Life has come back, and she still has 3 years to prepare, take precautions, and keep her mother away from danger. Go change this ant's life. In this way, Suya, who was full of energy, began a new life with Yen Shi, who was full of women. They moved away from the canal, away from the Qingjiangpu wharf where the previous explosion occurred, and moved into the embroidered clothes lane under the inner city river, temporarily storing the hope of rebirth in this small courtyard. In just 2.5 years, the two of them lived a good life. However, Suya never forgot what the murderer had said in his past life. The murderer must have been used by people. On the heads of the ants and commoners, the places closer to heaven are naturally nobles, high-ranking officials, wealthy gentry, and businessmen. Even ordinary people cannot have the power to manipulate the government. This Huai'an prefecture is precisely a place that connects to the sky. The Grand Canal, which runs around the city for 3,000 miles, heads north to the capital, south to Yuhang, east to the sea, and west to the Yellow River, Huai River, and Yangtze River. Countless high-ranking officials and wealthy gentry gather here, bringing information from all directions into the mansions of Huai'an City. After moving to the inner city, Suya found a job at the Tianhui bookstore in the city, which specializes in printing scripts and novels. She was dedicated to delivering scripts to various mansions, taking this opportunity to spy on the movements of local officials and increase her leverage to stay away from danger. Suya always felt that everything has a clue, and the more information she has, the stronger her ability to avoid disasters will inevitably be. How much convenience does an ordinary person think of a phone book delivery job as a way to pry into the government? That's just a bad idea. It's not the notebooks that bring convenience, but the ladies who love reading them. Never underestimate the women behind men. Many things are accomplished with the help of women, and with the help of a notebook, many worries are brought up and confidential information is often inadvertently leaked. The storybook, this little thing, is indeed fascinating. The thin booklet contains several stories of the rise and fall of ancient times, as well as many scenes of human joys and sorrows. It is not like traditional Chinese opera picking the stage, nor like storytelling picking the stage. It can bring people into the story at any time and place, and is a spiritual nourishment that the young ladies in the deep courtyard cannot put down. The money is so easy to make, and each bookstore has specially equipped a storybook lady to send storybooks and speech books to the women's families in various prefectures. Because the ladies are not all good at interpreting texts, the storybook lady, who is born in response to the times, shuttles through the houses in various prefectures, providing thoughtful services. At present, in Huai'an City, the most adept at creating new scripts is undoubtedly the Tianhui bookstore, and among the Tianhui bookstores, Suya is the one who understands the thoughts of Madame and Miss the most. Because Suya is very different from the other storybooks. She not only knows the market storybooks very well, but also is particularly good at telling stories. As long as you want to listen, she can tell the story in black and white. Most of the other storybooks are broken down by rote memorization of clichés, but Suya not only has her own insights and extensive references, but she is also very good at mobilizing the minds of the female relatives. She often only needs to analyze an example and a train of thought in a simple and profound way, and then looks at people with a smile of admiration and encouragement. The other party often feels that her inspiration has opened up, and when combined with examples around her, it is like a sky full of information and a sense of achievement. With just this skill, the thriving theatrical troupe could not match Suya's attraction. The people on the stage would leave after singing and fighting, but Suya's business of selling storybooks has a long history. With mental calculation but no intention, Suya is now not only a master of storytelling and reading in the delivery industry, but also an expert in Huai'an City gossip. She has also witnessed a wealth of insider information on official and commercial transactions. Of course, this is a secret. Suya must be like a silent gourd, never mentioning these secrets. The delivery of Su Hulu went very smoothly today, and she sold out all the silk handkerchief bags embroidered by Yen. She returned to Tianhui bookstore to settle her wages and received another year-end bonus. Walking in the sunset with silver coins, I felt that the blue stone slabs on the ground were particularly beautiful. The style of dusk was cold outside, but Suya seemed completely unaware. Her footsteps were light and she lowered her head to count the stones on the slate road, all the way up to the steps of the small bridge. She was thinking about the holiday arrangements in her heart, but suddenly felt something was wrong. Looking up, 3 tall, short, fat, and thin men blocked the bridge and looked at her with a displeased expression from the front. Suya blinked her eyes and looked around, unable to see anyone else. In the dusk of the cold winter and 12th lunar month, everyone needs to light up cooking smoke, dust removal, and prepare New Year's goods, and no one is still wandering on the road. The location of this small bridge is still very remote, and one side is separated by a wall a few yards away, which has a very poor view. It is really a good place to block the way and rob money. Suya immediately turned around and prepared to leave. After a few steps, she had to stop because 2 men came up at the end of the bridge to block her way. "What are you people? Let me go over." Suya looked very panicked. "Ha! Are you in a panic now? Damn girl, why didn't you panic when you were grabbing business? The person who came was not kind. Did you guys misunderstand? How could I compete with you for business? What kind of business do heroes do? Why didn't you grab it? We're singing on stage, you're selling storybooks off stage. A small man shouted angrily before being covered by someone next to him. Oh. Are you from Chuanqing Opera Troupe? Suya suddenly realized that she had been pushed to the edge of the bridge railing. While speaking, she looked under the bridge. The waterway was narrow and could only accommodate two small boats running side by side on weekdays. In winter, the river was low and shallow, and the water had already formed thick ice, vaguely swallowing the remnants of the sunset. A few big brothers from Chuanqing class, I'm mistaken. They were all called over by the ladies. You were singing on stage, and the ladies listened happily. I was pulled far away by the ladies to read, and my voice was not loud. No matter what I said, it didn't affect you. Suya looked at the flickering eyes of the newcomer, the hemp rope in her hand, and the large cloak hanging on her arm, and her evasive body gradually tilted towards the outside of the bridge. The dead girl is quick-witted, but she doesn't have a long memory. She has warned you twice but still hasn't changed it. Don't blame the brothers for being impolite this time. The person who came here has already been exposed, so she decided not to hide anymore and started rolling up her sleeves. What are you going to do? What are you doing? You're so fond of storytelling, so why don't you go to a brothel and talk about it? It's a pity you have such a big ugly birthmark on your face, otherwise you could have sold it for a good price. As soon as the visitor spoke, she rushed forward. Suya pretended to shout and immediately raised her hand to cover her mouth. Suya suddenly bent back to hide, accompanied by a scream. She fell over the bridge railing, rolled on the ice, and disappeared under the bridge. Hurry up and go find it. The leader let out a low curse and ran under the bridge first. Since ancient times, professional women have had to challenge more levels. Making a living is not easy, and why do bad guys have to deceive each other? We encourage fair competition and despise those who have done wrong. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Live Without Crying, 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Live Without Crying, 3. Suya fell off the bridge, and the 5 members of the theater troupe hurriedly went down to find her. On the winter riverbank, there was a slight layer of thin ice. They carefully leaned down against the bridge pier, and the golden light of the sunset shot through the bridge hole, dazzling the eyes and making it suddenly impossible to see the figures of the brothers in front. When the little guy at the end felt something was wrong and turned around to run, he suddenly received a heavy blow behind his neck, and he fell limply onto the edge of the semi-dry riverbed. Humph. A group of beasts, domineering. Black-hearted liver. What a big grudge, you're going to sell me to a brothel. An angry but beautiful female voice sounded, and Suya, who should have fallen tragically under the bridge, not only showed no signs of embarrassment, but also had a strong sense of authority as a villain. She tucked the hem of her troublesome skirt around her waist, with a look of anger on her face, and kicked each of the 5 people lying on the riverbed with hatred, without mercy. Someone was so painful that she wanted to wake up, so she kicked them unconscious again and tied the 5 people together with their belts. She stuffed their mouths with their stinky socks, twisted the hemp rope they brought into 2 strands, passed through the bottom of the bridge railing, and hung the 5 people on the bridge railing. She tied people up exceptionally well. These 5 people were of different heights, but after being lifted by her, their toes were aligned. With bare feet hanging down, they were only 1 or 2 inches away from the ice surface. With just one tiptoe, they could touch the ice surface, which could share some of the pain of being lifted on their wrists. If the ice surface was not crushed. Suya arranged everything, wiped the sweat off her forehead, and finally felt the long accumulated stuffiness in her heart sweep away. Why, look at me being weak and want to bully me. Humph. She stood at the bridgehead and looked down, with 5 drooping heads squeezed between the suspended arms, all still unconscious, no longer as mischievous as she had done earlier. Suya clapped her hands in satisfaction, straightened the hem of her skirt, and walked away. The afterglow of the sunset pulled her figure along, all the way to a pair of eyes behind the small building window in the distance. Shen Huai sat by the window, watching the graceful figure disappear into the alley, then withdrew his gaze and lowered his head to cough lightly. The two attendants who were focused on answering the inquiries of the famous Huai'an doctor Zhang Kanmu immediately turned their heads, and the young man with a white face came over to help him close the window. Zhang Kanmu almost finished speaking and looked at his expression, saying, "From my perspective, the young master's illness was not caused by injury, but rather a rare poison." Shen Huai's face, however, did not look poisoned. Not only was it not black or purple, but the young man's skin was beautiful and refreshing, with only a light lip color revealing some sickly features. His eyes were cold and indifferent, and there was no trace of a smile on his face. His jade crown was high, his waist was straight, and his whole figure was like a jade-carved deity, carrying an indescribable suppressive force. He saw that Zhang Shenmu had finished diagnosing his pulse, so he also withdrew his arm, nodded slightly, and his voice was a bit hoarse. "Thank you, Zhang Xingshou." Shame, Zhang Kanmu's face showed a guilty expression and he pondered, "I can only determine whether this is a poison or a disease, but I don't know the method of detoxification. How can I deserve the title of Holy Hand? Young master, please undress and let me see the wound." The injury was on the palm of the right waist, with a thin and long wound. The skin and flesh rolled over, but it didn't heal for a long time. The surrounding area was red and swollen. Zhang Shenmu pressed it with his hand, and the surrounding muscles tightened, which was probably extremely painful. He couldn't help but look up at Shen Huai's face again. The jade carving's eyes drooped and coldly aligned with his gaze. Hiss. This young man is really cold and dragging, without any respect for life and death, truly extraordinary. However, how did he sit with this poison on his back and waist straight for so long? Fortunately, the attendant was very sensible and respectfully inquired about the injury and medication. Zhang Shenmu regained the feeling of the holy hand, carefully washed away the old medicine from the wound, gouged out the carrion, sewed the medicine again, and then carefully prescribed the medicine. Shen Huai didn't even snort the whole time. If it weren't for his tense muscles and restrained breathing, Zhang Kanmu would have thought he didn't feel any pain. Change the dressing for the wound once a day, and take 1 dose of the decoction every 3 hours for half a month. The first 7 days of the medication were intense and looked dangerous. Young master, there is no need to panic. This is to suppress the toxicity and heal the waist injury, but the poison remains unsolved. The wound was delayed for some time, and it was not easy to treat. Zhang Kanmu was so busy that he sweated on his forehead. "Life is important, young master, we need to find loose sand to detoxify as soon as possible. How long can Zhang Xingshou suppress the toxicity?" Shen Huai got up from the bed, his face pale, and his forehead wet with sweat. However, he waved his hand and refused the new clothes brought to him by the attendants, only putting on a thick cloak outside. At most for 3 months, after a while, there will be no cure for the medicine stone. This poison is really vicious, hidden in the blood, and the poison will not spread quickly or slowly. The poisoned person's blood and energy will gradually become weak, and their physical strength will gradually deplete. In the future, they will only think it is an urgent illness and fatal. If it weren't for this application on the hidden weapon, the wound would have been healed for a long time before revealing a flaw. If the young master had been cautious in seeking me again, I'm afraid the timing would have really been delayed. Zhang Kanmu sighed and said, "When it comes to treating diseases and saving people, I am not inferior to others in my own questioning. But this method of treating poison is really beyond my reach." 2 years ago, he traveled to Huai'an and we had several encounters, but since then, he has been silent. The young master has been searching all the way from Wuchang and has never heard any new news. The left and right attendants didn't know what was on their minds, and their faces showed anger. However, Shen Huai remained indifferent. When the attendants took the prescription and went downstairs to find a young boy to take the medicine, he bowed to Zhang Kanmu as a junior and said, "Zhang Xingshou, my itinerary this time cannot be made public." "Understood, young master Zhou Huai." Zhang Kanmu was very knowledgeable in his field. Before Shen Huai could finish speaking, he returned the salute and took over the conversation. Shen Huai was escorted to the door, and Zhang Kanmu kept watching as the low-key carriage disappeared at the entrance of the alley. The little boy couldn't help stomping his feet to keep warm in the cold wind and asked, "Sir, is this young master a big shot? Are you still taking him out?" Zhang Kanmu tilted his head and glanced at him, thinking of the two capable attendants beside Shen Huai. He couldn't help but sigh and admonish, "After this is an old friend, you must remember. No matter when they come to find you in the future, you cannot stop them." Yao Tong responded in confusion, thinking to himself that in the name of a holy hand, people will treat him with courtesy wherever he goes, whether in the capital or Huai'an. There are few people who are as cautious and precious as they are today when seeking medical treatment and medicine. He should be more careful. The two attendants who were greatly admired by Zhang Xingshou in his heart were actually a bit confused at the moment. The young master designated to take a detour to cross a small bridge. After the carriage circled for a while in the darkness, they used the ear power of a martial artist to hear a vague murmur. The two of them immediately became alert, and the black-faced Gao Jun stopped the carriage and asked outside, "Young master, I'll go take a look." Shen Huai nodded inside the car and said, "Ask about the situation, don't do anything else." "Yes." After a while, Gao Jun replied, 5 people from the Chuanxing opera troupe in Huai'an City were hung on the bridge railing, claiming to have been robbed by a female thief. Su Yuan lifted the car curtain and said, "What kind of female thief can lift 5 of them at once?" "It said that it's the storybook lady from Tianhui bookstore, named Suya or Suya. Is it the female thief or not? Anyway, these few people are not honest. They only claim to have a personal grudge against that woman when the knife hit their necks. Today, they were planning to tie them up, but unexpectedly, they were taught a lesson instead." Shen Huai closed his eyes and leaned against the carriage, lightly tapping his fingers on his lap twice. "Let's go." The carriage was moving again, and the carriage returned to silence. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. To Live with a Smile, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. To Live with a Smile, 1. Since it was confirmed that Shen Huai had been poisoned, and the toxicity was dangerous, the inner worries of the two attendants could not be concealed. The carriage drove for a while in the twilight, and Su Yuan asked in a low voice, "Young master, it's important to treat poison. Do we need to inform the capital?" Gao Jun pulled open a crack in the car curtain and poked his head in to comment, "Yes, young master, your life is in danger now. Don't be stubborn. Do the attendants nowadays dare to say that the master is capricious?" Shen Huai coldly glanced over and couldn't help but narrow the gap between the car curtains. "Everything remains the same. I won't be unable to move immediately. If I let them know I'm in Huai'an now, I'm afraid I won't wait for poison to die. I'll also be annoyed to death first. If I can't find Lu Sandian, do you still want to persuade me to go to the capital and lie down and die?" "Young master." The two attendants were at a critical moment of concern, and when they heard him say this, they ignored the rules and spoke in unison to dissuade them. Shen Huai was well aware that he had already turned things around in his mind a few times. Finally, he sighed and leaned back on the carriage, caressing his waist wound and closing his eyes, saying, "What's the use of you two in panic when things get tough? I can still hold on. You two should gather up and quickly find Lu Sandian. Before that, don't face it hard and make me happy." The two had no choice but to agree. After a while, Gao Jun deliberately laughed outside the car and said, "Young master, that female thief is really malicious. The 5 of them have bare feet, and when their toes are straight, they can touch the ice. But they dare not really exert their strength, afraid of breaking the ice. They also dare not struggle hard, afraid of breaking the hemp rope and falling into the river, and their mouths are stuffed with socks, unable to seek help. Su Yuan said, I don't think what's going on here is necessarily what they say. The 5 men went to tie up a girl, which was clearly ill-intentioned, but they didn't do anything against them. It seems that the main intention is to punish and warn them. Gao Jun actually thought about it and asked, Young master, how did you know there was excitement under this bridge? No one answered him. Shen Huai wrapped himself in a cloak and leaned against the carriage, but he was already asleep, and his tired expression could hardly be concealed. Su Yuan quickly poked Gao Jun through the car curtain and whispered, after you finished asking, how did you get those stinky socks with your mouth stuck? Upon receiving the prompt, Gao Jun immediately lowered his voice and said, Oh, I've stuffed them back again. Su Yuan silently thought in his heart, whether it's bad or you. Gao Jun looked back at his expression and added, as the young master said, just take a look and don't do anything else. Su Yuan snorted and said, with this knife repair, they probably can calm down for a while, which can be considered as helping that woman. In the depths of midnight, a night watchman went to the yamen to report to the authorities, saying that someone was calling for help under the bridge. He lit up a lamp and it seemed like a multi-headed monster floating in mid-air. The on-duty yamen officer wrapped his cotton jacket tightly upon hearing this, saying that he must have been dazzled and should not talk nonsense anymore. When it was getting dark, the small business owner who got up early and set up a stall also came to report the incident, saying that someone was hanging on the ice under the bridge and looked like they were about to freeze to death. The yamen runner quickly called on his colleagues to rush over, and indeed saw 5 people hanging under the bridge with their toes straight. Between their toes and the river, there was a yellow ice pillar, suspected to be urine. The stinky socks in someone's mouth have been spit out for a long time, but the person is freezing so hard that they are trembling and unable to speak. No one can stand on the ice, so the yamen runners exhausted their boss's efforts and pulled the 5 people up, using a cart to drag them to the yamen. Unexpectedly, after the 5 people regained their composure, they stuttered and couldn't say anything. They couldn't explain why they ran to Heman Bridge or who hung them up all night. A discerning person can tell at a glance that there are ghosts among them, but if these little ghosts don't cry out for justice themselves, the yamen will have no way to start. Finally, the head of the Chuanqing opera troupe was notified. After whispering to the others, the head of the troupe picked them up with an extremely unpleasant expression on his face. Suya took the annual holiday and rarely slept a little longer. After waking up, she had breakfast and listened to Yan Shi talk about this novel matter, laughing uncontrollably. After laughing, she was surprised when she bit Mantu. Did those people dare to be hanged overnight? Surprisingly, they didn't retaliate in front of the government, which really disappoints their notorious tendency to sell people to brothels. It said that these few people must have done something unethical and have been punished by someone. Yen also found it funny and brought in a few pieces of cloth from the yard while laughing, laying them on the bed for cutting. Suya was puzzled and said, Mom, where do we have so much cloth and cotton in our family? Uncle Zhou brought it over early in the morning and asked me to sew the 8 beds brocade quilt quickly. They came over to pick it up at night. So much. Do you need it so urgently? I'll help you. Suya put away the dishes and quickly went over to ask for help. However, Yan Shi chased her and said, You can't help. Uncle Zhou said that Zhou Dezhu hasn't come back from collecting rent in the village yet, and the dust removal for Zhou's house this year hasn't been completed yet. He asked you to come over and help as soon as you have eaten. You go and take a look, come back early tonight. Tomorrow is New Year's Eve, and we still need to go and catch the annual festival. Oh, then I'll go. Suya left Shui Lane, turned left again, and arrived at the spacious Wenchang Lane. The long stone-paved road can accommodate 2 carriages driving side by side, which is very imposing compared to Shui Lane. Walking inside, passing through 2 mansions, he arrived at Zhou Mansion. Housekeeper Zhou was cleaning the 2 storefront door rings on the front door when Suya approached and said, Dad Zhou, are you very happy today? Happy, happy. It's so great to have a master's house this year. Lao Zhou's two arched eyebrows were almost slanted on his forehead, his eyes narrowed into a slit, and each wrinkle was filled with joy. He rubbed hard with a cloth in his hand, not to mention the copper door ring. Even the front door was almost covered in paste and shiny. Has someone come from Zhou's house? It turns out that the 8-bed brocade quilt that was sent to Yan early on Monday morning was made here. Suya was quite surprised. It is said that the owner of the house moved to Hangzhou several decades ago this week, leaving only 3 old servants to guard the house and collect land rent. How could they suddenly return to their old house before New Year's Eve? Old Zhou didn't care about her doubts, and his subordinates kept talking about not being thorough enough in dust removal this year. The master should have been particularly meticulous when he arrived. Why hasn't Zhou Dezhu come back to collect rent from the farm? Don't be delayed on the way, and urged Suya to hurry up. When Suya entered the door, old Zhou shouted from behind, saying that he would go shopping later and asked her to ask Grandma's son if she had anything to do. Suya agreed and turned left through 2 moonlit doors to reach the kitchen. The fire was burning under the stove, but no one was seen in the spacious kitchen. Grandma! Suya shouted softly, but no one responded. She saw that the fire stick under the stove was burning too much and was about to fall off. She walked over and straightened the stick inside, then turned around to look at the small courtyard behind the kitchen. Unexpectedly, a gust of wind hit, and a hidden weapon rushed straight towards the wind hole behind her head. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. To Live with a Smile, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. To Live with a Smile, 2. At that moment, Suya was about to stand up from the stove, with her feet straddling on both sides of the small stove bench. Her body was half up and half squatting, and she didn't even turn her head back when she heard the sound, as if she had grown a back eye. With her right hand lifted and her fingers pointed like pliers, she grabbed the hidden weapon. A flying chicken bone. Without waiting for her to speak, 3 gusts of wind rushed straight towards her vest, with intricate angles and assistance on both sides, sealing the space for her to avoid left and right. Unable to avoid it, Suya simply leaned forward and almost lay on the stove, barely avoiding it. He could feel the heat penetrating the lid of the pot on his cheeks, and then a low cry came from behind. Counter-attack. Suya responded and twisted her body in a bent position, turning from bent to tilted. Her slender waist and flexible upper body bounced up, and she pounced on the incoming person, which led to a fight. Although the kitchen is spacious, there is a wide table in the middle, meat baskets hanging from the beams, 2 large water tanks squatting solidly against the wall, and various knives and pots and pans scattered among them. If you don't want to touch them, the space for movement and jumping is very limited. After the 2 of them exchanged a few moves in the limited space, Suya was pointed to her throat by Grandma's son with a chicken bone. Grandma, don't dirty my clothes. My mother washes clothes very hard. Suya carefully grabbed the other person's wrist with both hands and pushed the chicken bones outward. That was a woman in her 50s and 60s, with some vertical and horizontal grooves on her face, but it was difficult to conceal her delicate figure. Unfortunately, a pair of thin hands were not dignified enough. If she changed into a lady's clothes and covered her hands, she could still intimidate others. Grandmother took back the chicken bones and slowly wiped her hands with a handkerchief, speaking with a metallic sharpness. What's the use of just having clean clothes? Only lightness skills can see through my whole body, and I don't even have the brain to counterattack. Isn't the learning time still short? I'll practice my escape skills first. Suya smiled and picked up a few chicken bones on the ground that were used as hidden weapons, wiping away the oil stains everywhere. Escaping is useful, why pursue? If you only know how to escape to save your life, how can you fulfill what you promised me? Grandma's son glared at her, as if there was a useless person standing in front of her. Is Suya a waste? From being easily crushed to death like an ant in her past life to possessing the power to crush most people in this life, this change only took 2.5 years. It is evident that Suya is not only not useless, but also capable. But it was precisely because of this person who had never appeared in Suya's life before, that Suya's current life was even more different from her previous life. The origin of this can be traced back to 2.5 years ago. On the third day after her rebirth, Yen was called by her neighbors to help take care of the child. Suya was alone in the yard washing clothes and washing a mat when suddenly a heavy object fell from the wall behind her. Before Suya could turn around to look, a cold sharp knife hit her neck. Grandma's son, who was seriously injured, used a knife to hold her neck and threatened to kill her whole family. She asked her to help hide her whereabouts and then hid in the firewood pile in the corner. She instructed Suya to cover the washed cool mat on top, making it look like it was being dried, and quickly concealed the traces on the ground. At that time, the air was extremely quiet, and Suya felt that the sound of washing clothes seemed to be far apart, with only her heart beating like thunder. She lowered her head and vigorously rubbed the clothes, hiding the trembling of her hands and feet. Before long, some light and shadows that refracted the sunlight swayed and passed by on the ground, and she understood that a group of people had already been chasing away from the wall with swords and knives. Perhaps she had died once and experienced a desperate situation, so while she was frightened, Suya's thoughts were surprisingly clear. Her thoughts flowed like a startled swan in her heart, suspecting that she was about to have an adventure and worried that it was just a new inevitable fate. However, no matter what, this old lady who had descended from the sky must have a martial arts skill to escape from so many pursuers. Instead of being silenced afterwards, it's better to struggle to the brink of death. Perhaps we can find a turning point, but God wouldn't let her just come back alive and die again, would he? So, when the strong man left and she dug open the firewood pile again, she faced a sharp edge that hit her face, widened her eyes, and shouted clearly, "Master." The dagger exuded a murderous intent and stopped at the center of her eyebrows, but it did not move forward. Grandmother struggled to catch her breath, her strength gradually dwindling, and Suya's teeth began to fight uncontrollably, with a particularly clear creaking sound. The 15-year-old girl tightly grasped the cloth skirt with both hands, trembling her throat, and using all her strength, she said word by word, "Grandma, I'll be your disciple. I'll protect you from being bullied again in the future. Don't kill me, I'll be useful." After a long silence, Grandma's son finally withdrew her dagger, leaned her body against the firewood pile, and scrutinized her up and down. She smiled strangely and said, "Oh, you girl are so bold and dare to make terms with me. Unfortunately, I can't trust my disciple the most. They are all inexperienced white-eyed wolves." She watched Suya suppress her fear and attempt to defend herself, then slowly added, "However, for the sake of your help, it seems that you have some talent. You make a poisonous oath first, and in the future, if you spare no effort to help me do something, I will teach you martial arts. To save my life, what is one thing? 10 things are fine." In this way, Suya followed Grandma's son to practice martial arts and take care of her severely injured body. Grandma's son then used the excuse that she had difficulty moving after falling to persuade old Zhou and Zhou Dezhu to agree to hire Suya as a part-time worker at Zhou's house for daily guidance. So, this mysterious grandmother-in-law is not only the biggest variable encountered by Suya after her rebirth, but also the greatest reliance that supports her changing her life in this life, and it is true that she has a kind heart for her. For 2.5 years, although she had no title as a master or disciple, Suya treated her grandmother-in-law as her master and waited on her. "Grandma, have you decided what you want me to do?" Suya emerged from the dead, realizing that her life had been handed over at some point. She carried a promise on her head, afraid that she wouldn't be able to fulfill it, so she often asked, "What can you do with your current 3-legged kung fu?" Grandmother returned to the stove and sat down, slowly continuing to nibble on the chicken legs. She only glanced at Suya from the corner of her eye and continued to dislike her, saying, didn't you come to help with dust removal? What are you doing now? Hurry up and tidy up, waiting to post couplets. After getting along for a long time, Grandma's son is no longer the fierce villain she was when she first met, but her tongue has not changed. Suya has become accustomed to being scolded and nodded obediently. As she was about to step out, a warning came from behind. Be cautious lately, come less at night and walk around during the day. Suya turned back in confusion and said, why? Since she started practicing martial arts with Grandma's son, she first learned the skill of climbing walls. Later on, Suya's lightness skills improved to some extent, and she was not satisfied with the information of women in various mansions. She began to take advantage of the night to explore the walls of various mansions in the city, and the walls climbed more smoothly. Her lightness skills traveled thousands of miles every day, and she was very agile, so ordinary people could not notice her whereabouts. This week, there were only a few more people in the mansion, and she was able to come and go freely in the governor's office. Shouldn't she be so cautious? Do whatever you're asked to do, where do you get so many? Why? The grandmother.in.law rolled her eyes and expressed a strong hatred for the lack of iron and steel. That young master of the Zhou family has people with him. Guan Yu carelessly lost Jingzhou, so be careful not to sail for thousands of years. Don't delay my peaceful days. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Life is like a drama, fighting acting skills, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Life is like a drama, fighting acting skills, 1. Alright, just be careful. Don't dare to miss the peaceful days of the wicked mother.in.law. Suya hugged her head and escaped from the kitchen, suspecting Grandma's son's identity for the 10th time in her heart. What is the little master of the Zhou family? Is this what a domestic slave can say? It is said that Grandma's son was a wet nurse who had served a young lady in front of her. The young lady was unlucky and passed away early after marriage. Grandma's son was heartbroken and invited her to come back and guard the house where the young lady used to live. But Suya's grandmother.in.law knew nothing about Zhou's past and didn't know if it was still the original one. She had seen her grandmother.in.law chatting with Lao Zhou, and when she couldn't pick up the conversation, she explained that she was old and confused, and couldn't remember many of those things. Unfortunately, those old uncles and nephews actually believed it and have not seen anything unusual about this old woman to this day. Suya once saw her grandmother.in.law wiping tears at someone, saying that she, as a forgetful old lady, is not in good health. If she were to leave a good person like uncle and nephew Zhou, she would definitely be bullied and afraid she wouldn't be able to survive. At that time, she couldn't help but feel thunder rolling in her heart. This wicked mother.in.law was hidden and would still be bullied. It's good if she doesn't bully others. My grandmother.in.law later accused her of being too shallow-minded and disdainful. Life is like a play, you know nothing. Suya stood on the open space in front of the main hall, holding a cloth and a bucket. She looked up at the Huai'an Hall plaque in front of the hall and sighed. The owner of the Zhou family indeed had good manners and ran far away. She left a good house for someone else to use as a theater, and indeed should hang this plaque. Today's Zhou mansion was very lively, with Lao Zhou leading teams of people in and out, sending many items to Huai'an, which didn't stop until noon. The rarest among them were 2 loads of medicinal herbs and a box of medicine jars. Suya saw them through the flower wall and was very surprised. People have always sought good luck. During the Chinese New Year, it is not an emergency to not consult doctors, but rather to try not to use soup and medicine, all for the sake of health and safety. But looking at the battle of the Zhou family, it seems that they are afraid that they won't be able to buy medicinal herbs during the Chinese New Year, and there is a strong trend of emptying the pharmacy. Su Yechang is so big that he has never seen such a taboo before. What disease is the owner of the Zhou family who came here? Looking at old Zhou's morning joy, it seems that it's not a big deal. Perhaps wealthy families have many quirks, but coincidentally, the Zhou family values their health particularly much. In short, Suya felt that something was not right in her heart, and with the advice of Grandma's son, she didn't want to approach Duoxing incident recklessly, so as not to affect her future entry and exit of Zhou's house to learn martial arts. Unfortunately, today's incident is biased towards finding her. Suya had just finished cleaning the front, middle, and back halls, and wanted to go find Lao Zhou to get a ladder to clean the pillars. However, when she reached the entrance, a delivery man stuffed a bonsai into her hand. The man had a painful expression on his face, clutching his stomach and legs, trembling his throat and pleading, "Miss, this basin is going to be placed in the courtyard with a pond inside. Your master is in a hurry, could you please bring it in? I can't hold it anymore." After finishing speaking, he ran away, unable to stop shouting, as if he was about to take a slow step and pull it into his pants. In the cold winter of the 12th lunar month, the flowers and trees are rustling, but the bonsai is still verdant, with strong branches and a delightful spirit, clearly well taken care of. Suya looked around inside and outside, and saw that old Zhou was stepping on a ladder to clean the eaves of the door, so she asked him what to do. Old Zhou was left disheveled by the accumulation of dust and felt that it was not suitable for him to go into the yard. He asked her to take him to Huai'an and said, "There are people in the yard, just leave them to you. Don't look around and don't talk too much." After he finished speaking, he continued to focus on organizing the hooks for hanging the lantern. Suddenly, he stopped and muttered to himself as he looked in the direction where Suya disappeared, "Being young is light and agile. The little girl is carrying such a heavy object, and there is no sound when walking." As Suya walked towards Huai'an Pavilion holding the bonsai, Su Yuan and Gao Jun were boiling medicinal herbs in the corridor. The elegant courtyard was filled with the fragrance of medicine. Both of them are in their early 20s, but their personalities are quite contrasting. Su Yuan, a calm and refined little white face, patiently taught Gao Jun how to add medicinal herbs to the pot according to the order on the prescription. He explained several times and found that the little black face across from him was still confused like a fool. "Gao Jun, are you really a fool?" Gao Jun's black face was now wrinkled up like a fool. No, it looked like the word June, which means there were no mosquitoes or insects in winter, otherwise the wrinkled strokes would have trapped him when passing by. "Su Yuan, brother Yuan, why don't you have any patience with me? This medicine is too exquisite, and I'm afraid I'll add the wrong amount of time. What should I do? Otherwise, I'll go find someone else and you stay and boil the medicine." Without hesitation, Su Yuan slapped Gao Jun's head and made him stumble with a slap. "I can't even take a medicine well, can I still expect you to find someone? Is this something that can be delayed?" Suddenly, a crisp sound came from inside the room, followed by a series of heart-wrenching coughs. The two of them changed their faces and rushed into the room without considering anything else. So when Suya, who was holding a bonsai, entered the courtyard, she only watched as the unguarded medicine jar under the corridor pounced out, filled with a strong fragrance of medicine. Practicing martial arts made her hearing sharp. Not only could she hear the suppressed cough in the spacious room, but also the gasping sound sandwiched between the coughs. The two of them were worried and comforted with panicked voices, clearing up the porcelain shards on the ground. "Is this recuperation? Why is it more like waiting for death? Do you dare to move around in the cold winter and 12th lunar month in this physical condition? I'm afraid it's not the kind of abandoned child who was exiled by the family, injured and sad. Or perhaps the wanderer encountered an urgent illness on their way home and had to seek medical attention nearby." Suya was full of doubts, and the plot from various storybooks rushed to her mind. The biggest question was, what reaction should she make now? It seems inappropriate to shout, medicine puffed, it's not appropriate to stand still and do nothing, after all, if that decoction is thrown down again, the charcoal fire below will be almost extinguished, but it seems even more inappropriate to peel off the lid of the medicine jar. Maybe people will think she's going to poison Suya stood cautiously in place, pondering until she hurriedly walked out of the door. After seeing Suya, she paused and immediately quickened her pace to rush to her face. Her hands were like pliers, grabbing her neck and scolding, "Who is that?" "Oh no, I habitually entered the drill mode when I entered Zhou's house and forgot to increase the sound of footsteps." For a moment, Suya felt exposed and instinctively wanted to smash the bonsai out. Even though she had already started kicking her feet, her mind was spinning in the midst of lightning and fire, and she screamed, truly letting go of her hands and squatting down with her head in her embrace. The attack slowed down uncontrollably, and with a gentle hook and lift of the toes below, the fallen bonsai was picked up. It came like the wind, but ended up like a landslide, and its skills were very agile. "There are no maids in the mansion, who are you?" Gao Jun casually placed the bonsai under the corridor and came back to grab Suya's elbow, pulling it out. Suya looked startled and undecided, bowing her head to cooperate honestly, and was pulled out to find old Zhou. In the Huai'an pavilion, the silver wire and carbon fire were burning warmly, and the windows were slightly open for ventilation. Shen Huai gasped for breath and withdrew his gaze from the gaps in the window lattice. He put down the blood-stained handkerchief that was covering his mouth and said to Su Yuan, who had just cleaned up the ground, "Go check her background, is it Suya?" After a while, Su Yuan realized and said, "Suya. She's the female thief mentioned by those people under the bridge." Yes. Su Yuan's strings immediately tightened in his heart. There was an outsider with martial arts skills appearing in Zhou's house, and this matter should not be underestimated. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Life is like a drama, fighting acting skills, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Life is like a drama, fighting acting skills, 2. Gao Jun dragged Suya to find old Zhou. Later, old Zhou realized that he seemed to have made a mistake in his arrangements, so he carefully compensated Gao Jun and explained in detail the reason for hiring Suya to help clean and asking Suya to deliver bonsai at the last minute. Gao Jun's face was serious, and he strongly advised, "The young master is currently ill, so unrelated people should not enter Huai'an Pavilion." Suya, who was unrelated, lowered her head and rubbed her arms silently. From a lofty perspective, I could only see her head hooked, revealing a faint pink birthmark on her cheek, spreading from her temples to her cheeks, as if sensing his gaze. Suya's head hooked lower. Gao Jun returned to Huai'an and heard that Suya was the female thief who bound people. He was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth and said, "This is completely different from what old Zhou said. Is there an intention for her to infiltrate Zhou's house? I only found out after checking if there were any attempts." The two of them were well trained and acted separately. At night, they thoroughly investigated Suya. Suya is 17 years old this year, and her family used to be a military household. Her father worked as a small leader in the Chao Bing. In the 18th year of the Qinghua reign, when the Yellow River burst, she died to save people. She left behind her widowed mother and orphan daughter, and soon moved out of the military household camp in Qingjiangpu. Currently, she lives in a civilian house in Shui Lane, just behind the walls of Zhou's house. She relies on Suya to work as a storybook lady in a private printing shop called Tianhui Bookstore in the local area, specializing in storytelling for women in various prefectures and selling Su's embroidery products to make a living. Su Yuan stood at his desk. "While studying ink, I am compiling reports." Gao Jun was responsible for investigating inside the house and nodded upon hearing the words, "This is similar to what old Zhou said. Her background is quite pitiful. So how did she get into the Chuanqing opera troupe?" Huaben novels in the Huai'an region are more popular than elsewhere. Suya is somewhat famous and knows how to tell legends, which is deeply recognized by the women's families in various prefectures. The Chuanqing troupe felt that she had been robbed of her business and wanted to vent her anger on her. It is said that they had warned Suya several times before. This girl didn't take her seriously, and the members of the Chuanqing troupe took advantage of the chaos at the end of the year to tie her up and sell her to a brothel in another city. Hush! Selling good women to brothels. Beasts. Gao Jun took a cold breath. Yesterday, he even lied to me that he just wanted to catch someone and deserved to be hung in the wind and frozen all night. No, he should have been castrated directly. Don't stare at me. I don't talk like that outside. Can you continue to say? How did she get involved with Zhou Zhai? Look at what we found, it's different. Su Yuan insisted and glared at Gao Jun again. Seeing that the master who was writing with his head down did not speak, he continued to report. 2.5 years ago, the old nanny grandmother in the house fell at the fish market by the canal, which was brought back by Suya. After Sun Pa fell, she was also taken care of by Suya. Old Zhou and his team saw that this girl was kind-hearted, hard-working, and poor. In addition, Sun Po's body was damaged after she fell, and several old servants needed someone to help her. They asked her to come over every day to help with odd jobs for an hour, which has been helping her until now. Well, Lao Zhou and Sun Pa also said the same. Suya is a kind-hearted girl. From a time perspective, she has been working at Zhou's house for over 2 years, so there is not much suspicious about her. But ordinary women do not have the ability to easily knock down 5 big men and even hang them up in the air on the bridge railing. I haven't found out her martial arts background. Where did this orphan girl learn martial arts? Gao Jun was taken aback and said, isn't her father a Chao Bing? It's reasonable to teach her some martial arts when she's alive. How many martial arts achievements can Suya cultivate in the military camp? When Suya lost her father at the age of 12, even if her father was not an ordinary Chao Bing, but a martial arts master who did not perform well, Chao Bing would spend years soaking in the canal. How could he have time to teach at home? Perhaps Suya has exceptional talent and is a martial arts prodigy. You really dare to think, but unfortunately, you didn't expect to be on the right track. The key is, she pretends to have no martial arts skills when she walks around. At least you didn't notice when you caught her yesterday. Su Yuan generously gave Gao Jun a cold eye. This woman is indeed cunning. Gao Jun felt deflated and quickly found a step to flatter the master. Fortunately, the young master is very observant. Yesterday, he could easily see through her disguise. At this point, Shen Huai had already finished writing the letter in his hand. His slender fingers pinched the letter and shook it dry. After folding it, he stuffed it into a blank envelope and personally melted lacquer wax, dripping it onto the seal. When the lacquer was about to dry, he took out a small seal and sealed it. Orphan and widowed mother, making a living is not easy, and some self-protection thoughts are not a problem. Her father can sacrifice his life to save people, and she is also enthusiastic about helping others. When punishing the theater troupe, she still remembers to stay on the front line. The family background will not be very bad, so it's okay to keep it for observation. He used his mind twice, and now he repeated the reports of the 2 attendants in his heart, giving instructions. Yes. Shen Huai pondered for a moment and then said, as for the origin of martial arts. She frequently enters and exits Zhou's house. Have the 3 old servants of Zhou's house checked. Gao Jun quickly replied, Old Zhou and Zhou Dazhu are both uncles and nephews of the Zhou family, and they are the sons of the Zhou family. Grandmother was chosen as a wet nurse for Miss Zhou from the Zhuangzi 30 years ago. Later, she married Miss Zhou to Yang Zhou, and within 2 years, Miss Zhou passed away without leaving any offspring. She returned to Huai'an, but because there was no one left in her family after the flood, the Zhou family remembered her dedication to Miss Zhou and allowed her to stay for retirement. I have observed each of these 3 people one by one, and so far I have not seen any abnormalities. It didn't sound unusual, so Shen Huai pointed to the letter and said to Su Yuan, send it out. Su Yuan picked up the letter, but hesitated for a moment. Young master, will this letter be delivered so that our days in Huai'an can be peaceful? Gao Jun also looked at Shen Huai with concern, hoping for his affirmation. Unless I am completely deposed, how can I be peaceful? Shen Huai's face showed a smile rather than a smile, and his eyes darkened. Zhao Qing, that fool, has a lucky heart. He can't wait to take action in the military camp, probably because he thinks I have no power, and no evidence. Why can't he? If I swallow this loss, I will probably die in peace. Keeping it is also a disaster, so let the people in the capital solve him. You make time to find Lu Sandian. Yes. At this time of the Chinese New Year, Lu Sandian will never stay in the deep mountains and forests. Even if I dig 3 feet of land in Huai'an City, I will dig him out. Su Yuan carefully put the letter into his arms and instructed Gao Jun to take good care of his master. He decisively threw himself into the night and went looking for someone. Gao Jun went to cover the door and turned back in surprise. Young master, it's snowing. It's snowing, and when it first started, it wasn't very heavy, but it was very seasonal. Shen Huai seemed to be stirred up and walked slowly to the corridor, reaching out to pick up a few snowflakes. Gao Jun followed behind, worried that he might catch a cold, but looking at Shen Huai's expression, he wanted to speak but dared not, so he had to mutter to himself, holding a medicine jar and going to boil medicine again. The powerful medicine prescribed by Zhang Shenmu needs to be administered every 3 hours. Gao Jun's practice makes perfect, and he finally learned how to control the heat. After taking it, Shen Huai coughed twice and his mental state improved a lot. Coupled with the special circumstances of this year, Gao Jun dared not advise further. In the small courtyard separated by a wall from Zhou's house, the dough of rice cakes was fermenting in a steamer, and Yen, who was thinking about waking up early tomorrow, was already asleep. Suya walked out of the room lightly, jumped onto the wall, and crossed over the ridge of Zhou's house. The snowflakes fell on the tiles, a little slippery. Suya accidentally slipped under her feet and immediately fell to the ground feeling guilty. She looked around and saw that there was no movement before lightly touching the distance again. Gao Jun had just brought back water and was surprised to see Shen Huai waving his hand at him, making a sign prohibiting him from following. Then, with his toes slightly down the corridor, the injured young master disappeared into the snowy night like a wisp of smoke. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Night Tour. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Night Tour. Shen Huai followed Suya to stroll through most of Huai'an City. This girl seemed to be in a market, flying eaves and walking walls, wandering around various mansions. If the study lights up, she goes to listen to the study, if the bedroom lights up, she goes to listen to the bedroom. A few bedrooms happened to be busy with work, so unusual noises came out. She seemed to be embarrassed and ran away with a guilty conscience, shrinking her neck. Just this face, still want to listen to the corner of the wall. Since his injury, Shen Huai has been in a bad mood. How can he feel good when he is secretly plotted? Unfortunately, he only discovered the clues halfway through and was eager to seek a doctor, so he had to endure his anger. It was only when I entered Huai'an City and saw the scene of Suya Bridge pranking people that I felt a bit happy and satisfied. Although Zhang Kanmu's poison detection conclusion was expected by him earlier, Shen Huai later thought that the reason why he could accept it so calmly may also be related to the distraction at that time. Suya is skilled in martial arts and has been in and out of Zhou's house, so he is full of loopholes. If it weren't for her pitiful background, he wouldn't have allowed this unstable factor to stay around. But I didn't expect this girl to have a habit of visiting various mansions at night. It's hard to say she's a first-time offender based on her familiarity with the road. Recently, Shen Huai has been guarded like a piece of jade by 2 attendants, and his own condition is also poor. Tonight, he followed Suya around in the snow. Although he was a bit tired, he felt quite refreshed. However, this girl is also too capable of running. After all, Shen Huai was injured by poison and felt weak after following. Surprisingly, Suya noticed her and almost blocked her in the alleyway of a certain house. He quickly passed through the lunar gate and took refuge in an empty room. Suya noticed someone following her, but couldn't see who it was. She couldn't help but feel a chilling feeling of praying mantis catching cicadas, yellow sparrows behind. For the past 2 years, she has been very cautious in her travels to various prefectures. With an understanding of the layout and personnel of each prefecture, she has never been discovered before. Tonight, she was actually tracked by someone, and the other party did not reveal her whereabouts. I wonder if there is any intention behind her. Suya felt guilty and didn't dare to delve deeper, let alone act recklessly in someone else's house. She quickly ran away. Shen Huai waited for her to walk away, so he also prepared to leave. As he was about to leave, he turned around and glanced at the room, only to find that it was actually a study. The 2 piles of documents still piled on the desk seemed to be related to the government. With a thought in his mind, he simply flipped through the bright light of the snowy night and found that it was all about water transport affairs. Not only were there water transport affairs between Beijing and Hangzhou, but also correspondence between Guangxi, Guangdong, and Huai'an. In a recent letter, it was mentioned that the rebellion of the chieftains in Yong'an, Guangxi, lasted for several months and was finally suppressed in early December. The report from General Zhao Qing of Jinshi has already been handed over to the Ministry of War, and he is sure to receive many rewards. It is also the beginning of the Chinese New Year, and the military pay of the Guangxi Border Garrison Army may need to be given priority. At present, the financial situation of the imperial court is empty, and this silver will probably need to be transferred from Nanzili. The recipient is advised to pay attention to matters related to military pay. Originally, this is the private residence of Lu Yun, the Chief Justice. The official position of chief is quite common, and it is held by various departments. It is of the 6th rank and is 2 levels lower than the governor. It is not common that the Chief Justice Officer stationed in Huai'an is a clever job, directly dispatched by the Ministry of Justice. All cases related to water transportation are under the jurisdiction of the Chief Justice Officer, who is only under the management and control of the water transportation supervisor at the local level. Other departments, including the Huai'an Prefecture, have no authority to inquire. Since the establishment of the canal, water transportation has been the gold flowing on the canal. Most of the expenses incurred by the imperial court, salaries of officials, military pay, and food adjustments are transported through water transportation. Such an important position makes the transportation of goods independent of various departments, overseeing the system of troops, horses, grain, money, materials, and labor. In addition, because the Governor-General of Transportation also has the power of local governor, it is equivalent to also overseeing local administration. With greater power, the problem of greed becomes difficult to control. Countless institutions are supported by transportation, and it is difficult to calculate the interests between officials and merchants. Just by looking at the prosperity and extravagance of Huai'an Prefecture, which serves as the transportation command center, one can see a glimpse. So, in order to prevent corruption, the officials dispatched by the 6 departments to assist in the transportation of water in Huai'an are generally rotated once a year, and there are also rotations every 3 years. The current Chief Justice Officer dispatched by the Ministry of Justice to assist in the transportation of goods must have had a term of less than 3 years, but he already has such a large private house, and his hands are probably not very clean. However, Guangxi has nothing to do with water transportation. Lu Yun is in charge of water transportation cases, but what does he care about Guangxi for? Shen Huai couldn't help but furrow his brow and continued to look down. The letter continued, the process of quelling the chaos was difficult. General Zhao Qing couldn't bear the pressure from the court and was caught accidentally. Fortunately, he was saved by a passing boy. Shen Huai couldn't help but snort 2 breaths from his nose when he read this point. When he was about to look again, there were lights outside and voices approaching. He quickly restored the bookcase to its original state and hid somewhere. 2 people came, but their voices remained low as they entered. The obedient person in his 40s, with a stern expression and a sunken mouth, was the Chief Justice Lu Yun. Lu Yun handed the letter that Shen Huai had just flipped through to another person. After reading it again, both of them frowned at the same time. "My lord wants me to come over overnight and instruct you to prepare quickly," the other person lowered his voice and said to Lu Yun. "How to prepare? General Zhao Qing has done too much about this. Now that the petition has been handed over to the capital, he just remembered to fill in the gap. It's really confusing." Lu Yun took the letter back and folded it back into the envelope, his face gloomy. "Mr. Su, you know, that drug doctor Lu Sandian, although he has been to Huai'an before, has been several years and has been without a trace for a long time. How can we besiege him? Difficulty is a bit more difficult, so what's the solution? After all, Zhao Qing is related by marriage to the adults, and every damage is done together. The adults are also with us. In short, now we just suspect the identity of that person. We just need to control Lu Sandian first, no matter who that person is, we'll die 100 times. If that person is really Shen Huai, if we harm him, it would be a great crime of plotting to kill the imperial officials, and that would be beheading. The Empress Dowager will not spare us either." Lu Yun walked back and forth on the open space in the room with his hands behind his back, his face becoming increasingly ugly. He is just a young Hanlin, and by chance he achieved the 5th grade. The emperor only cherishes his talents and allows him to be capricious. But he doesn't stay in the capital well and insists on running around. As the saying goes, the sky is high and the emperor is far away. He is so rebellious and reckless. Who can he rely on even if he dies outside? Mr. Su, who was in his 50s, had a white face and 3 white eyes. He occasionally glanced at Lu Yun and spoke slowly and provocatively, "You don't have to worry too much. He is just a cousin's grandson that the Empress Dowager has recognized halfway through. How much emotion can the Empress Dowager have towards him?" Seeing that Lu Yun did not respond, he was not in a hurry. He slowly folded the letter and put it back in place, with a gentle expression. "Besides, even if the Empress Dowager investigates, isn't there still Consort Wan?" Shen Huai initially refused the imperial concubine's family's marriage proposal. With the imperial decree and the protection of the Empress Dowager, the concubine had no choice but to hold him back. We are also venting our anger for the concubine. In short, as long as we don't leave any evidence, what kind of storm can his death cause? Mr. Su, is this cost-effective? Lu Yun stopped by Mr. Su's side. After all, General Zhao Qing of the western town is only related by marriage to Mr. Su. Why should Mr. Su bear this risk for him? It's important to note that strong dragons don't overpower local snakes. In this territory, what is beyond adults' control? There's no risk. After Su finished speaking, he shook his head and sighed, then smiled and patted Lu Yun's arm. "Mr. Lu, you need to worry about your future first. As your term in Huai'an is about to expire in 3 years, and there are many powerful criminal departments in the 2 capitals, why don't you plan to move up again? Is it difficult? Do you still want to go back to the Qingshui Yamen in Nanjing to retire?" As soon as he said this, Lu Yun's expression was indeed stunned. He swallowed his words and arched his hand, saying, "We still need Mr. Su's kind words." The two of them chatted a few more words, but they didn't delve further into the topic of Spring Festival rest arrangements. When the two of them left, Shen Huai walked out from behind the curtain, his face very cold. He didn't expect that there was another person in Huai'an Prefecture who could cover up the sky. Just because he was related to Zhao Qing by marriage, he would unconsciously kill someone, even if they were the top scorer in the imperial examination, the granddaughter of the Empress Dowager, or a 5th-rank official in the court. Is it foolish, or is it really enough to cover the sky with one hand and act recklessly? Shen Huai's eyelids narrowed slightly, and in the darkness, the bloodthirsty intent in his eyes flashed by. Grace is as heavy as hatred, and it is indeed true. Speaking of which, he not only had no personal grudges with General Zhao Qing, but also had a life-saving kindness towards him. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Utilization. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Utilization. There is a lot of talk about this matter, and we won't go into detail for now. Anyway, Shen Huai feels nauseous when he thinks about it. In short, he is the passing boy who saved Zhao Qing. He went on a trip to Beijing to avoid noise, so he kept his name hidden all the way. At that time, he passed by Yong'an, and for some reason, he gave a helping hand. He went alone to explore the camp at night, not only saving the main general Zhao Qing, but also forcing the chieftain to submit in front of the battle. This kind of effort to turn the tide actually had some insider information and a bit of luck, so Shen Huai didn't want to take credit and immediately prepared to leave. But Zhao Qing held on to him and refused to let him go, expressing his unforgettable kindness in saving his life. He wanted to keep Shen Huai to drink Qinggong wine and write a letter to him to ask for his help. Shen Huai naturally refused and only drank 3 glasses of Zhao Qingjing's wine. It's because there's a problem with drinking this wine. After drinking 3 cups, several sharp edges emerged from the forest, but Shen Huai suddenly felt his hands and feet weak. Although he tried to avoid it, he was still scratched by a flying knife. Zhao Qing was filled with shock and anger, as he was a traitor and a hidden assassin under the leadership of the chieftain. Even if he wanted to go and take someone, he was determined to do so. Shen Huai had a high heart. Although he suspected that Zhao Qing was greedy for meritorious service, he was at a critical moment when he was most averse to right and wrong for various reasons. He was willing to settle down, so he said that the rebellion of the chieftain had just begun, and it was pointless to stir up trouble again. After a simple treatment of the wound, he took Su Yuan with him and left high and stern. Upon arriving in Wuchang, Shen Huai felt weak and his wound remained unhealed for a long time, which was very abnormal. Wuchang poison Dr. Lu Sandian is famous all over the world, and he is also a doctor of both poison and evil. Zhao Qing happened to have traveled from Wuchang to Guangxi, so Shen Huai searched for Lu Sandian on the spot and then listened for his whereabouts all the way to Huai'an Prefecture. Now it seems that Zhao Qing is not only plotting, but also poisoning, not only poisoning, but also fearing that he will not die. Where was the loophole that made Zhao Qing suspect his identity and keep chasing after him? Shen Huai was momentarily unsure of the answer, so he decided to follow the clues and see if Zhao Qing and this local snake in the Huai'an region wanted to pinch themselves like soft persimmons, and whether they could pinch them or not. The most important thing now is naturally to see who can first find the poisoned Dr. Lu Sandian. He returned to the Zhou residence, took 2 sips of the freshly brewed medicine, and instructed Gao Jun to investigate the Chief Justice Lu Yun. I'm worried about not having a place to look for Lu Sandian, so some local snakes are rushing to help. It's great. You go and keep an eye on people, just prepare the medicine every day, and don't have to stay here all the time. He rinsed his mouth with clean water, put down the handkerchief that wiped his mouth, and said, when Suya comes back to Zhou's house, you can call her over. The topic changed too quickly, and Gao Jun didn't react. He asked blankly, looking for Suya. Young master, do you want to hear about books? Listening to books. That's not true either. Shen Huai only saw Suya's unknown secret and guessed that this girl might have mastered many secrets of the local officialdom. A gentleman is good at deceiving things. He is in a hurry to seek medical treatment and needs to be cautious in preventing damage. However, Shen Huai is understaffed. Since there are people like Suya who are convenient, why not be a gentleman? However, Shen Huai wanted to use Suya, but Suya didn't give him a chance. She hasn't even been to Zhou's house these past few days. After realizing that she was being tracked that night, Suya decided to calm down for a while. Besides, at the end of the year, she pointed to the holidays and had a good time. So Suya helped Zhou's house clean up the dust, settled her monthly salary, and put aside everything to focus on accompanying her mother. In the early morning of the Chinese New Year's Eve, she pulled Yan Shi to run to the annual gathering. The mother and daughter strolled through the busiest market of the year from beginning to end. Although they didn't have money to buy valuable things, the festive season was filled with food. Suya picked 2 fluttering butterflies from the head flower stack held by a small vendor, one purple and the other pink. She first put the purple butterfly on Yan's head, and then inserted the other pink butterfly at the edge of her hair bun. The thin silk butterfly wings trembled slightly in the pile of hair, creating an extremely vivid scene. Suya was very satisfied with her gaze. With a smile on her face, she paid the money to the vendor and pulled Yan Shi to see how beautiful she looked from her pupils. Yan murmured softly, saying that no adult wore this, but was amused by Suya and couldn't help but laugh. She also couldn't help but examine her appearance from Suya's pupils, and the little restraint slowly turned into joy, spreading from the corners of her eyebrows and eyes. On New Year's Eve, Suya wrapped Yan warmly and climbed up the roof with a ladder. The houses in the small courtyard are not high enough to overlook the lights of every household, but a sky curtain is in sight without any obstruction. Suya often flies over the eaves and walls at night, and has long been accustomed to this openness. Tonight, she wants to share it with her mother. In her past life, she had never imagined that she would hastily bid farewell to her mother. Su's father passed away early, and Yan was innocent. The two of them thought that people would wash clothes and sell embroidery to make a living. Their lives were very poor and simple. At that time, she had already thought about how to live her whole life, marry a loyal husband, have children for him, be filial to his parents, and also support his mother with him. When Yan's white hair turned gray, she would cherish her sparse white hair even more than her mother did. She would use her nimble hands to carefully help Yan tie her white hair into a very spirited and beautiful appearance. Older people probably have bad teeth. She needs to patiently cook fragrant rice porridge, and sprinkle the congee with crispy meat floss that melts in the mouth. It is certainly difficult to marry with her mother, and it is even more difficult to meet a loyal man. In her past life, Suya stubbornly refused to give in to the bottom line. If she couldn't meet the right person, it was also good for her mother and daughter to rely on each other. Therefore, even at the age of 18, Suya still had hope for the future. Unfortunately, the heavens did not fulfill people's wishes. A beam of bright light exploded in the night sky, interrupting Suya's thoughts. It's midnight, the old year and the new year are passing at this time. Firecrackers are ringing in the city of Huai'an, fireworks are blooming, and the night sky is brilliant. Suya looked at the radiance in Yan's eyes and silently made a wish. Mother, in this life, my daughter will definitely protect you well. She took out the Kongming lamp and ink from behind the ridge of the roof, and the two women whispered and wrote their wishes on the lamp paper. The orange candlelight dyed the lampshade with a moving color. The Kongming lantern slowly rises, rising against the current in the snowy sky, with thousands of fireworks as a backdrop, as if about to unveil a bright future. Suya hugged Yan Shi and smiled, looking up and loudly saying, "Dad, don't worry, I will definitely take good care of my mother." Tears flashed from the corners of Yan's eyes as she gently brushed away the snowflakes that had fallen on her daughter's hair. Silly child, don't always worry about your mother and delay the good opportunity to get married. Oh my mother, why are you in such a hurry? I have to read so many notebooks every day, and there are all kinds of men in them. Unfortunately, there are also many affectionate and unlucky people. How could it be so easy to meet someone worth trusting? Suya held onto the roof tile, shook her head, and said confidently, "There are so many blind marriages in this world, all of which are just gambling on luck. I'm not in a hurry to gamble. If you want to get married, marry a hero like your father. Otherwise, you'll have to be a woman like Mrs. Liang. You can't be in a hurry." Madame Liang was the wife of Han Shizhong, a famous anti-Jin general in the Song dynasty, and also a legend in the storybook. Mrs. Liang's maiden name is Liang Hongyu. She originally came from a family of military generals, but later her elders were punished by war and she became a prostitute. However, she was unwilling to fall into the dust and, with her talent in both literature and martial arts, developed a good relationship with the famous general Han Shizhong. She sang along with her husband and fought against the Jin army. She was also appointed as the protectress of the country. The couple had been stationed in Huai'an City for 300 years, and the Lady Liang Temple in Huai'an City has been bustling with incense. Yan said angrily, "You're talking nonsense again. Mrs. Liang suffered a lot in her early years, and how much has she suffered? I hope you will live a safe and smooth life." "Okay, good, safe and smooth for a lifetime, my mother will also be safe and smooth for a lifetime." Suya pressed her cheek against Yan's face and responded softly. The unique soft and fine fur on the girl's face was sparkling with the night light and snow, as if it had covered her skin with a layer of fragrant mist. She looked at the fireworks in the sky, her eyes flowing with a hint of heroism, and she looked extremely graceful. But on those snowy cheeks, where is there any trace of that birthmark? It is not easy for a woman to establish herself in this world, and Suya, who has a secret in her heart, is especially afraid of creating waves as she walks on thin ice. Therefore, despite her beautiful appearance like a blooming flower, she only dares to show her mother alone. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Encounter 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Encounter 1. On this side, Suya and her daughter celebrated the Chinese New Year happily, while on the other side, Shen Huai endured the few days of the new year with a cold and difficult time. The potions opened by Zhang Kanmu were indeed more and more powerful, and from New Year's Eve onwards, Shen Huai couldn't even get up in bed. Su Yuan had not returned from searching for someone, and Gao Jun had no time to attend to him. He trembled and guarded Shen Huai, who was drinking medicine and vomiting blood, until his wound finally healed. On the 5th day of the first lunar month, the sound of firecrackers in Huai'an City began from midnight. In the early morning, before it was fully dawn, someone felt dark and set pine doors and twigs on fire. The pine resin soaked Huai'an City, and the doors and windows could not be stopped. Old Zhou didn't know anything and came to ask Gao Jun, "Today is the day to welcome the god of wealth, and all the shops have opened. Local big families also need to gather their people to go to the cemetery outside the city to pay respects to their ancestors. There are various flower arrangements and performances, which are the only excitement in Huai'an City. The young master is celebrating the new year in his old house for the first time. Why don't you accompany him out for a walk?" Gao Jun smiled and nodded in agreement, saying that he did have plans to go out at night and there was no need to prepare meals specifically at home. Today, Huai'an City is indeed bustling, with various sacrificial ceremonies and flower arrangements arranged in a long queue, walking and performing, and stopping and walking, showcasing the strength of major families. The dressed tribe members and the parked pedestrians, together, have blocked several major streets. The crowd jostled one after another. Suya carrying sacrificial items and protecting Yan Shi stood at the entrance of an alley, waiting for the large team to leave the city. The crowd was less crowded before heading towards the Qingjiangpu Pier. During the holiday season, there are few ships at the dock, which is colder than usual. On the riverbanks on both sides of the dock, only a few or two people were burning paper money. On the river surface, there is a thin layer of ice that no longer flows. The wandering souls buried in it for thousands of years do not know if they have all passed away. People who cannot find their bones will mourn by the river. Suya took out the wine and vegetables from the basket, filled 2 cups of water and wine, and handed 1 cup to Yan Shi. Together, they sprinkled the wine on the riverbank. Yan's eyes had already turned red. This was the place where Su's father often stayed before his death. It was the place where their family reunited and parted ways every year when escorting water transport between Beijing and Hangzhou. Su's father was buried in the canal, and his bones were nowhere to be found. Later on, she often wandered around this dock, watching thousands of sails racing on the river from afar, and thinking of people and things. After moving out of Qingjiangpu, Suya begged her not to come here alone again, citing numerous nightmares, so the opportunity to sit quietly by the river for a while like before was rare. No matter how painful the parting is, it will be adapted to the passage of time. Suya has already passed the state of crying on the shore. After leaving the dock, in order to make Yen happy, she took her to the tea house to listen to books. Storytelling, drama, and storytelling are all in one continuous line. Judging from Suya's level of appreciation, the storyteller at Sanrun Tea House is also outstanding. He talks about the court and the market, sometimes passionate and sometimes touching, but never vulgar or superficial. It is very suitable to bring the Yen family to listen to. In the evening, many people who returned to the city after ancestor worship gathered in groups of 3 or 5 outside. Suya didn't want Yen to be crowded with people, so she asked for a small table on the second floor, leaning against the storytelling platform on the first floor, with a good and quiet view. In no time, Yen Shi was truly immersed in listening. Suya saw that the tea brought by the waiter was not hot enough and was worried that Yen Shi would get cold. She carried the teapot downstairs to change the water. When she reached the staircase, she heard whispers coming from the third-floor staircase. Mr. Xie rarely returns to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. How could he choose to meet in such a tea house? One person sighed and complained. You don't understand that. Precisely because Mr. Xie rarely comes back, how many pairs of eyes are staring at him? The matter is serious, and a few adults want to have a secret conversation, so naturally they want to have 2 banquets. You see, tonight's banquet at the Drunken Wisdom Tower is just to avoid attention, and the tea gathering here is the highlight. The other person lowered their voice, listening very well to the inside story. No wonder after we arranged it, we went to the Zuaxian Tower to guard the entrance first. You said, at least we have some dignity in our bodies. How could we do this job normally? Hee, do you feel aggrieved? You just have to endure it. If things are resolved later, we'll have to endure hunger and cold for a while. Are there any new tasks? Hee, in short, something big is going to happen in Huai'an Prefecture. The person who knew the situation chuckled vaguely before continuing. At this point, the 2 of them were about to come down from the 3rd floor. Suya couldn't listen anymore and quickly went downstairs, carrying a teapot. About half an hour later, the 2 pairs of servants quietly staggered back and forth, passed through the lobby, and under the guidance of their staff, went up to the 3rd floor. Suya's heart tightened as the skinny old man from behind walked in and scrutinized the building with a pair of sinister eyes, and that face fell into her eyes. She remembered that in her past life, she had been in front of the government office to cry out for justice. It was this old man who hurriedly came out of the office, scolded the office staff for dereliction of duty, and instructed them to throw her away with a stick. Later, she mobilized several wealthy families who had died in the dock explosion to see him. The face that had been searching for suddenly appeared, and Suya's hair stood on end, unable to hear the storyteller's half-sentence. There are still 6 months left until the events of the past life, and what major events are currently brewing. She looked at the internal structural layout of Sanrun building again. The 1st and 2nd floors were scattered, while the 3rd floor was full of private rooms. The grandstands of each private room faced the center of the restaurant, with bamboo curtains and light gauze hanging to isolate the line of sight. Unless guests lifted the curtains, the privacy was extremely good, and it was completely impossible to see which private room the old man had walked in. Suya looked anxiously at Yen, who was listening to the book, unsure if she would have the chance to eavesdrop on the secret conversation that was happening on the 3rd floor if she had been sent home first and then back. Mom, let's eat here tonight. We'll start working tomorrow. If we don't finish listening to this story and go back, I'll definitely have a few days without good food and sleep. She finally made up her mind and quietly discussed with Yen, who was accustomed to diligence and frugality, before getting up and going downstairs to order dishes. Afterwards, he glanced at the gap and flashed up to the third floor. Compared to the 2 floors below, the third floor is very quiet. The corridor is located outside, and walking around the building is actually a clever idea that allows you to listen to books inward and view the scenery outward. Suya searched outside for half a circle and indeed found the private room where the old man was. But as soon as she put her ear on it, a person turned out at the corner of the hallway and shouted loudly, "Who is that?" Suya didn't have time to take a closer look. There was only one staircase, and the direction had been blocked by someone. The window railings around the winter corridor were also closed, and the scene downstairs was still unknown. In a hurry, she had to turn inward in the corridor, and on her left side was a semi-open private room. Without much thought, Suya dodged and avoided entering. There was only a young man drinking tea alone in the private room, with a charcoal stove burning for heating. However, he was still wrapped in a cloak, as if immersed in the passionate storytelling downstairs, without noticing any sudden movement. When Suya flashed in, she quickly checked and found that the private room was not large and the furnishings were not cluttered, making sure there was no place to hide. It was too late to exit again, so she simply rushed towards the person, lifted his cloak, and lowered herself to hide inside. She quickly hid her skirt under the winding cloak on the ground, while pressing a sharp weapon against the man's waist. Before anyone could say a word, the door of the private room was pushed open from outside. End of this chapter.